The biggest reason that Karen Reed, a college professor charged with murdering her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, has gotten so much public support is because of a man known as Turtleboy. Aiden Kearney is a blogger and citizen journalist who live streams on social media. Through his reporting and advocacy, thousands of people have joined the Free Karen Reed movement. However, Turtleboy's involvement has also led to some legal issues. In December of 2023, he was indicted on multiple counts of witness intimidation and conspiracy related to his activities surrounding the case. Despite these challenges, Kearney continues to advocate for Reed, and now his connection to the case has made its way into some significant issues leading up to the retrial of the century. And tonight we'll bring in our trial insiders to get to the bottom of it. But first, on November 13th, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan, were brutally stabbed to death in their off-campus home in Moscow, Idaho. The shocking crime left the college town in fear as authorities searched for the killer. But those 4 students were not the only people in the house. There were 2 more roommates, Dylan and Bethany, who survived. They were awake in the early morning hours around the time of the brutal crimes. In fact, Dylan saw the killer just before he left the house, although it wasn't clear to her who he was and what he had just done. Dylan and Bethany communicated that night via text message and ended up in the same room in that house. Tonight, we will take a look at those communications, which lay out a timeline of what was happening and when it was happening as we continue our in-depth coverage of the Idaho student murders. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. Great to have you aboard on this Friday night. Big story. This is a big case, and we've got some big developments tonight to talk about. Of course, we're talking about the 4 students from the University of Idaho who were brutally murdered inside their house that they were living in while going to school. That house has since been demolished. The community did not want it there anymore, and apparently neither prosecutors nor the defense wants the jury to see it, so it's gone. But it clearly is an important part of this case and was the scene of this brutal, brutal murder. I want to walk through the house with you a little bit because there's 3 levels to this house as you look at it. On that top floor, that's where Maddie and Kaylee were. And that's where they were murdered. And they were together up on that top floor. There were a few rooms up there, but they were together in the same room. And it was in that top floor, in that room, where the knife sheath in this case was found. Significant part of the case, but these 2 young women, excuse me, I'm sorry. These 2 women were brutally murdered. Top floor of the house, no one else is on that top floor. If you go down now to the middle floor, that's where Ethan and Xana were killed. And that's where Xana's room was. I think Ethan was staying there that night. This is the main floor, which is where the kitchen is, which is where the sliding doors are, which is where they believe the killer came in and out of that home. So the middle floor, kind of the main floor of the house, right? Because this is where the kitchen is. This is sort of the way most people come in and out of the house. And that's where Ethan and Xana were. But there were 2 more roommates inside that house, Dylan and Bethany. Dylan was on that same floor, that middle floor, but in a different room from Xana. Bethany was down on the bottom floor. So that night, Dylan and Bethany were there while all of this was happening. And this became a quadruple murder. Thank goodness 6 people weren't murdered, but it could have happened. They were there. So what I want to do right now, because we've gotten more information about the 2 surviving roommates and how they were communicating in those early morning hours. But I want to put it all in context. So I'm going to take a little bit of time here to walk through the timeline of events that night leading up to when the murders are, so we can see when this text messaging was taking place, when these communications were taking place between two roommates in the same house, but again on different floors. Dylan on the middle floor, where two of the murders took place, Bethany downstairs, where we don't believe the killer ever went. So we begin at 9 p.m. Ethan and Xana are at Sigma Chi, which is the fraternity, which is relatively close to the house. That's where they were that night. From 10 to 1:30, Maddie and Kaylee were in town at the Corner Club, and it's a nightclub / bar in town, and they're there spending the night. At 1:40 a.m., after leaving the club, they were seen on some video from the Grub Truck. The Grub Truck does a live stream on Twitch. And this became an extremely important video early on in the case, because everyone was like, the murder took place. We have video of two of the victims just beforehand. What are they doing? Who is there? What's happening? And a lot of attention was paid to people that were at this Grub Truck. And there was a man standing behind her. Obviously, all these folks are innocent, but everyone was wondering, who are they interacting with, and did it have anything to do with what was going on? Because it seemed like there was one young man who was there and arrived when they arrived and left when they left. But obviously, he has nothing to do with the murders, but was a person that people were wondering, okay, how is he connected? Does he know anything about what happened that night? Was it someone that they bumped into in the nightclub? Then at 1:45, Xana and Ethan return to the home. And again, the home is so important in all of this. Here it is before it was knocked down. 3 stories. This is the parking lot where you can enter that bottom floor where Bethany was. And then as we approach it here, some body camera video of the home. Again, this is the bottom level, but if you go around the side and go up the mountain a little bit, you can enter through the sliding doors into the kitchen. And that's where they believe the killer entered the home, and then climbing up through the back to the parking lot. 1:56 is when Maddie and Kaylee arrive back at the home as well. So you've got Xana, Ethan, Maddie, Kaylee all back before 2 o'clock in the morning. What's happening with the suspect? 2:42 that night, the suspect's cell phone pings at his home in Pullman, Washington. Excuse me. 2:26 to 2:52, Kaylee and Maddie are calling Jack, Kaylee's ex, and someone that people are looking at, because this is someone that has a relationship with Kaylee, and someone who they were interacting with, at least on the phone that night. 2:26 to 2:52. Obviously, he's innocent in all of this. 2:47, the defendant's cell phone is traveling south through Pullman, Washington. Then the phone is turned off or placed into airplane mode, right? Off the grid. The phone is then off the grid at 2:47. This is interesting. 3:29 a.m., there's multiple sightings of a white Hyundai Elantra in the King Road neighborhood, and that vehicle makes 3 initial passes by the King Road residents. So you can see the road that you can drive by to go past the home. That's the road. There's cameras in some of the homes that are capturing this. Again, it's nighttime, it's dark. So it's difficult to make out license plates, but you can see vehicles that are making those passes. At 4 o'clock, Xana receives a DoorDash delivery. At 4:04, the suspect vehicle enters the area for a 4th time and turns around on King Road multiple times, finally towards the home. And this obviously is the time where they believe the suspect is about to enter the home. At 4:20 a.m., the suspect vehicle is seen departing the King Road residence area. Okay, so 4:20 is the time where we believe the killer is now leaving. That brings us now to the first text messages from Dylan to Bethany. Dylan on the second floor, Bethany on that bottom floor. Dylan, who in interviews said that she saw a man with bushy eyebrows. Dylan, I'm freaking out right now. No, it's like a ski mask almost. Bethany says something, explicit words, shocking. Actually, then Dylan, like he had something over his forehead a little and mouth. I'm not kidding. I am so freaked out. At this point, Dylan is panicking, it seems, right? She's freaking out. At 4:24 to 4:28, Dylan is calling and texting Ethan, Kaylee, and Maddie and getting no response. No response whatsoever. But there are these attempts at communication after the text messages to Bethany. At 10:23 a.m., Dylan sends a text message to Kaylee and Maddie, but receives no answer. The text message, please answer. Are you up? Are you up? And then it's 11 a.m. and finally 911 is called. The phone is passed around a little bit, but one of the callers says, one of the roommates who's passed out and she was drunk last night and she's not waking up. We believe that's Xana, and she's not drunk, passed out, she is stabbed to death. Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah. So an acknowledgement that, yeah, they saw a man last night. A lot of people reacting to this, trying to understand what is going on in the minds and the way that Dylan and Bethany are reacting to this very unusual circumstance. I mean, you're in Moscow, Idaho. I mean, a lot of parents send their kids there because it was so safe. Let me bring in my guests who are going to help us here. Joining me, psychotherapist, CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey, and human behavior expert and author, Susan Constantine. Great to have you both here. Dr. Janie Lacey, so in those text messages, what are you taking away from them? The back and forth between Dylan and Bethany in the wee hours of the morning.
What I'm taking away is it's early in the morning, they haven't gotten any sleep. And, sometimes when we look at, Vinnie, when people are going through something that they may not normally be able to process, something that's out of their normal, sometimes their responses don't follow what we would consider, especially in hindsight, like logical behavior. So in these situations that we're looking into that we would consider them acute trauma, right? There's this threat response system that may be activated. But I would also consider looking at the text messages that whatever was happening in the house before that night, perhaps were they used to having sometimes strange people coming in the house that were guests of the other roommates, right? So I would be interested to understand what was the normal moving of traffic that was happening before that night, to really be able to understand what would be considered normal before actually looking at their response. But we also know when sometimes these things happen, people have these freeze responses, alongside what we would look at as fight or flight reactions, which sometimes is not what we would consider logical behavior, looking in hindsight to how someone reacts to things that are out of the norm for them in their situation.
And this is very out of the norm. I mean, extremely out of the norm. Now, Susan Constantine, what strikes me about all this is the back and forth, talking about a guy in the ski mask, and there's obvious concern. She wouldn't be texting Bethany if she didn't have some level of concern. But then also, in reaching out to Maddie and Kaylee and Xana and even Ethan at one point, they all live in the same house, but she's not leaving her space. She's communicating this way instead of going to the room and knocking on the door. I mean, she had to be absolutely frightened to death here.
Yes, and then keep in mind, what do kids do, and teenagers or even young adults? They text. They don't really knock on the door. So what I read all the way through every one of those texts, and I assigned different emotion and cognitions that was going on. And it really started to rank up when of course, they saw the guy with the mask. When they saw the mask, there all of a sudden the threat started to become realized. Fear started to evolve. And then from there, then there's shared fear between BF and DM when it says, hey, I'm no kidding. I'm really freaked out. This is like emphasis. So am I. Now there's shared fear. My phone is going to die. And he says a bad word. And that's frustration. Come to my room. At this point in time, now flight happens, just like what Doctor was talking about. There is that fight, flight, or freeze kind of response. They see this happening, right? They're sensing this threat. This amygdala is really ramping up. And what do? We go into response. So now threat is being realized. They're taking cover because it's all right here. You literally can break down every single one of these and assign an emotion cognition with it, which I did. I went all through this, Vinnie, and I assigned a cognition with every single one. So they started off with not being truly very concerned. Nobody's answering. That wouldn't be unusual. But then maybe a little confusion. And then it kind of ramps up to where Kaylee, there's this prompt, answer me. And then says it again. Then it says, yeah, dude, WTF. Then shock response happens. Like, what's really happening, man? And when you can see it kind of morphing all the way down to this fight or flight response when the threat's been realized, and then all of a sudden they sense the danger and threat was in progress. And then that's when they start running and going for a shelter.
The other part of this, Dr. Janie Lacey, is she's interviewed afterwards, and she's describing like, yes, I was drinking, but I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or if it was real in the moment. And that confusion. And the other thing that strikes me is talking about Xana, who's been stabbed to death. And they, I guess, believe to some extent that she's passed out, maybe drunk, and not sure exactly what's going on. And I don't know exactly what the scene looked like. It may not have been super bloody, depending upon where the wounds were, et cetera. But all of that, is to me such a horrible experience for them, but trying to figure out what's real and what's not real. And it seems like reality is not really clicking in the moments.
Well, you said it, Vinnie. So they're under the influence. It's early in the morning. And when people are confronted with something that's horrible and unprecedented, we know that the brain sometimes, especially because they're also young, right? You and I that are seasoned people may have had a different life experience. But when you're young, their brain can struggle with making sense of what's happening, right? This cognitive disruption, it's early in the morning, it can lead to, we know, delayed reactions, confusion, difficulty making decisions. And we know that that's a genuine psychological phenomenon. So especially when someone has extreme fear that's setting in, and then we're also taking that potentially under the influence, not resting, that it can really get someone to be able to not to be stuck in their ability to take action, especially if they believe like a threat or something is happening. And then I would also probably assume to a certain level that there's disbelief. They're having a good time, they're home, and she's seeing someone and not sure if she's dreaming. Is she conscious? Is she not conscious? Right? This element of disbelief can also come into play. But we know with all of the different factors happening, processing potentially extreme violence in the middle of the night was not happening in that moment. And sometimes our mind can really have these temporary ways to protect ourselves when we're faced with something that doesn't fit our understanding of the world in the moment that it's happening.
And it seems that with all of this happening around 4:30 in the morning or so, that at some point they might just fall asleep. Bethany and Dylan downstairs, I believe in the same room, alone. And I'm wondering, Susan, that they had this level of fear, but it seemed together they're able to comfort each other to a certain extent, but not knowing what had happened upstairs, but maybe suspecting something is off, but not to the point of calling 911 or not to the point of leaving the safety that they felt in that room to go and check. Yeah,
and when you think about just humans and naturally, I mean, it's interesting how our body responds to these types of situations. You know, the threat wasn't realized right away. And then we had this natural gut reaction, you know, that intuition, something wasn't right. And the fact that they were just kind of texting back and forth, not really responding, you know, as Dr. Lacey was talking about, there's this delayed reaction because this has never happened before. They've never probably had these kind of issues with their fear or that somebody would be breaking in. So they were detached from it. There was almost like this out-of-body experience that they had, and they didn't even relate it. But then there was something that physiologically that happened, and that is you can't explain it, and neither can I. It is something that God gave us. And when he gives us that natural response, hey, danger is here, something's not right, things are not fitting right, and then your body will respond. I had the similar reaction when I was a witness in a murder case when I was 15 years old, which is another story you have to read in my book, by the way, because it was identical. Where the assailant was there, I was face to face with something was off. I got up, ran into the house. He ended up stabbing a woman 21 times with a paring knife. How did I know that? It's just God protects us.
Dr. Jenny Lacey, Susan Constantine, thank you both so much. When we come back, we'll bring in our think tank, break this down, what it means for the trial, plus coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates the Murder of 13-year-old Madeline Soto, we'll take a look at newly revealed messages between Stephen Stearns and his parents. What do they reveal about this accused child molester and killer?
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates tonight, 9/8 Central, only on Court TV.
This stuff about playing a race card is preposterous. The racial division was so great that people saw the facts differently.
Trial and Error. Why did O.J. win? New episode Sunday night, 8 Eastern and Pacific, only on Court TV.
I'm Madison Mogan's father. She was so great. She lit up every room she'd come in, and she was just so positive and fun, and we love her and miss her so much.
If you could speak to the person responsible, like.
Oh, you never know how far something like this reaches, how many people it hurts, and how they're gonna have to live with this for the rest of their life.
The way he was describing his daughter, you could say that about all of those young folks who were murdered. I mean, it's a good group of kids that were doing well in school, had bright futures. I mean, everything was like on target for the rest of their lives, and they were enjoying themselves. I want to bring in our think tank tonight and talk about the developments involving these witnesses. Joining us tonight, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor making his return tonight on this Friday, Brian Watkins. Also with us, the chief public defender for Oakland County, Michigan. She represented the Oxford High School shooter, Paulette Lofton. And trial attorney, big case Mike Jafer is with us as well. Great to see everyone. As we think about these two survivors, right? The two roommates who survived all of this. One who physically saw a man dressed in black, bushy eyebrow. Based upon the actions, the communications, and everything else, how does that impact this trial? What does the jury do with their testimony and description of what they did and how they were communicating and what was going on inside that house tonight? What are your thoughts, Brian?
You know, it helps paint the picture for the prosecution. You know, that's what the prosecution wants to do, is put that jury inside that house. You know, they want the jury to feel what's happening. Now, legally and technically speaking, it doesn't do anything to prove that the defendant did this crime. You know, that's no direct evidence as to who did it. But putting the fear and painting that picture and setting the scene for that jury is very, very important.
Hey, this is going to be extremely emotional testimony, Paulette, because it's tough enough being a young person, right? And then you lived in the house where all this happened. One of you saw the killer, whether it's the defendant or not, the jury will tell us, obviously. But You saw the killer. You were somehow spared, and now you've got to talk about what happened that night, what you did, what you didn't do. How much impact do you think it will have on the jury to hear from Dylan, to hear from Bethany, who were in that house?
I think it's going to make a huge difference. Usually in this sort of situation, as a defense attorney, I would be objecting to these text messages coming in because I would argue they were hearsay. But here in this case, the prosecutor is arguing that this creates a timeline. And with the timeline you gave viewers not that long ago, I think the messages are definitely coming in. It fits perfectly into the timeline that the prosecutor is trying to establish. I think the text messages are going to have quite an effect on the jury. And as was just stated, obviously it doesn't prove that the defendant charged is the one that committed the crime. But I think with the time frames, with his phone being off, his car being seen, and then you have these text messages literally being sent at the moment that he's presumed to have left, I think it's going to have a huge impact.
Mike, what do you think the jury does with the odd fact that everyone talks about in this case, and took us a while to fully understand, is that 911's not called till 11 o'clock in the morning, right? There's no call until 11 in the morning. Does the jury need to understand what's going through the minds of these young girls? Do they need to understand the fear? Do they need to understand the confusion? Or is it not really significant, or is it very significant?
I think it's a big sore thumb right in the middle of the prosecution's case, right? I think this is, to me, the most puzzling fact that I've looked at in this case. Is why did they wait? The text messages were between 4 and 5 a.m., right? And, you know, they were at the grub truck. They went late. They got home, I think, around 2 o'clock. It's been a big sore thumb right in the middle of the case. I think the jury is going to have it explained to them very, very, very directly, right? Because we are dealing with young, impressionable kids. At the end of the day, timeline is a big deal in this case. This whole case is a circumstantial, like, roadmap from Brian Koberger turning off his phone, driving a far distance, turning it back on. And so these messages are going to help explain the lack of a phone call to 911 until 11 o'clock the next day. I think this is a big deal. It's a sort of, I'm riveted to see what the answer is, and I want to see how they approach it. But they're going to have to approach it head on. I think the jury is going to ask that question, because at the end of the day, was it Brian Koberger or was it not? That distance of 6-7 hours, it matters.
Yeah, and it's really something that everyone was talking about and reacting to as well as we got more information now. But I remember early on it was a big question. So one of the victims, Kaylee, her dad has been very outspoken throughout and spoke to Brian Enton on News Nation, who was filling in for Ashley Banfield. And just like the public, the first time he saw or heard about these text messages was the same time we did when they were just released through a filing. Here's what he said about them.
What struck me is, you know, it's not like Hollywood. It's not a scripted thing. It's not like what you would see on a TV set. That was a raw, emotional breakdown of two girls that were scared for their life. There's part of me that knows that, like how that house was, you know, there's a lot of pranking going on. There's a lot of partying. So there's part of them that was probably thinking, you know, is this a prank? Am I getting messed with? I know for a fact my daughter loved pranking people. So my heart goes out to those two girls. I'd have a hard time if I was one of their parents to have my daughter put through what they've been put through. I mean, we sat 2.5 years on what? You know, why did this need to be hidden from the public? Why did these girls have to be dragged through all this? These are the type of things that, why I do these interviews and why we push back a little bit, because I think a lot of people are questioning right now why this was hidden.
And Brian, he's been very concerned from the beginning because a lot of stuff in this case is under seal. A lot of the information hasn't been made public. His daughter is one of the victims. He feels bad for these two girls. What do you think the trial will be like for those two young women to go through, to show up in court, get up on the witness stand, be questioned, be cross-examined?
It's going to be terrible, you know, just having them having to relive the most devastating and, you know, a child's worst nightmare. I mean, You're in your home. That's your safe place, you know, and to have someone come in and murder your roommates, there's nothing more devastating. And they're going to have to live it all over again as though they're in that house. You know, the prosecution and the defense attorneys are going to put them in that house and ask them questions about what they were thinking, where they were standing, what they were feeling, where were they walking, what were they looking at, what were they seeing. And they're going to have to absolutely relive this from beginning to end. And it's very, very, very devastating.
Brian Watkins, Paulette Lofton, Mike Jafer, always great to have you on the show. Next time, you're going to be on a lot longer. Tonight, we got to move back to Massachusetts. We're going to bring in our trial insiders to try to get some inside information about what's happening in the Karen Read trial, because Turtleboy seems to be on the front of everything that was happening in some of the decisions that have been rendered and some of the affidavits that have been filed as well. We'll talk about it when we come back.
Chris Albert and Julie Albert, who claim that they don't know Michael Proctor, conflicted state trooper Michael Proctor, well wishes and their condolences for Michael Proctor's grandmother, who died in 2009. It is 2023 right now. That is at least a 14-year close relationship. They know each other so well that Courtney Proctor Albert, at her wedding in 2012, had a wedding party. And of course, also in that picture, there was two other, one young boy and one young man. Young man, they to the left in that photo, because of course it's his sister's wedding. But the ring bearer in that wedding was a 7-year-old innocent boy named Colin Albert.
There's Turtleboy, Aiden Kearney. No doubt that it was his live streaming, his leadership that led to the Free Karen Read movement, and all the people have come to support Karen Read locally and then nationally now, as this case has absolutely blown up. He's been charged with witness tampering. He claims his innocence and says he's exercising his First Amendment rights in everything that he was doing. He has an attorney. Karen Read's team wanted to add his attorney to their team, but take a look at what happened. The motion denied by the judge not allowing it, saying a conflict of interest. The proposed concurrent representation involves a conflict of interest that is not waivable under Massachusetts rules of professional conduct. The court cannot permit such conflicted representation and declines to add to the defense team that currently members at least 4 lawyers, 3 by admission pro hoc vice. So what's going on here? Let's bring in our insiders. Joining us from Massachusetts, our Karen Read trial insiders, trial attorney Wayne Dennison, criminal defense attorney Joseph Krowski Jr., Karen Read supporter Nick Rocco, and YouTuber Yellow Cottage Tales Kevin Lenahan with us. Okay, Joseph, I'm going to start with you. I know you have some limitations in what you can say relative to Turtleboy because of your representation of Colin Albert. Can you speak on this conflict of interest and explain it to us, why someone can't represent 2 defendants in 2 different cases?
Oh, absolutely. And just to be clear, I no longer represent Colin Albert. I represented him when he was subpoenaed to the federal grand jury. It's something that I think is appropriate to disclose, and I've done so numerous times on this show. But where the topic addresses him, I think it's only the right thing to do. So what's going on here is, look, Karen Read has a right to have local counsel, and she's represented by David Yannetti, and also has a right under the principle of pro hac vice, to have out-of-state counsel. And she has 3 out-of-state attorneys, of course, Jackson Little from California, and she also has local counsel from New York. As I understand it, counsel for Mr. Kearney, Mark Betterow, wanted to join the Karen Read team. And the problem with it, it's kind of an unconventional thing, is because although they are not per se co-defendants, their cases are certainly connected. But the real problem is there's privileged information, there's protective orders in the Karen Read case, and likewise in the Kearney case, there are protective orders. So it would put Betterow in the unenviable position of perhaps learning information in one case that is protected that might be favorable to a client in the other case that he can't share with that client. So I think the court saved everyone a big headache because ultimately I think problems would have arisen, and I think there would have been limitations on what Betterow could have done, including in cross-examination of the witnesses. You know, we keep saying it, there's something new in this case every day. And this is another thing that I've never experienced either in one of my own cases or someone else's cases.
Now, something else I picked up, it was an affidavit, I think it was filed by Brennan, the new special prosecutors brought in, and he's pointing out allegations of some sort of nefarious relationship between Karen Reed and Aiden Kearney, AKA Turtleboy, saying that Kearney's phone revealed the defendant's phone number. Karen Reed and Mr. Kearney had 189 phone calls between June and December of 2023, communicating for an excess of 40 hours, and that phone numbers associated with Yannetti and Jackson, the attorneys for Karen Reed, communicated with Mr. Kearney at least 29 times in 2023. Nick, Rocco, I don't know how much you know about this, but from your perspective, what is the nature of this relationship between Karen Reed and Turtleboy Aiden Kearney?
Well, we know that they had a grand jury to indict them on witness, I think it was conspiracy to commit witness intimidation, and they came up with a no true bill. So all Hank Brennan is trying to do is revisit the past. So, I mean, I don't really know what he's trying to get at. We already knew that they had communications. Karen and Turtleboy have talked before. That all came out when he got arrested and they took his cell phones. It was breaking news here in Boston. But they came up with nothing. They came up empty-handed. No true bill was delivered. So Hank Brennan is just putting this out there again to bring attention to, I guess, the fact that Turtleboy and Karen had spoken, which is not a crime. So what he's trying to do is, Hank Brennan is basically just trying to say, look at Karen Reed put Turtleboy up to doing all this stuff when in fact they have no evidence of that. It's more of a fishing expedition, I would say, at this point with that.
Now, Wayne Dennison, one of the things, Turtleboy, you know, we have like a new world that we live in, right? We have traditional media like Court TV, but we've got independent people who are on social media, who are on Substack, who are on YouTube, everywhere, who are covering things, covering stories. Like, he's communicating with someone who's involved in a case. I mean, Watergate had sources. Every reporter has sources. Sometimes they're anonymous sources, sometimes they're on the record sources, but it's the way the business of media has worked for years, Is there a problem with someone who's covering this story communicating with a party in the story as a source, whether it's the attorneys or the actual party? I mean, I'd like to interview. I spoke with Jackson and Yannetti. I did it on television, but I spoke with them as well.
That's the principal defense to these witness tampering claims. He has a First Amendment right to talk to whoever he wants to. And the question is whether that has morphed into witness intimidation or activities that would adversely affect the trial. But in all candor, he's got a very strong First Amendment argument that he can talk to whoever he wants to.
So, Kevin Lenahan, from your perspective, are you seeing anything that's going on that is not okay here? I mean, you're in the business too. You have sources, I'm sure, that you talk to. Yeah. I mean, that's what we do. That's how our business works. Sometimes we can put them on the record. Sometimes you get information on background, but you're always reaching and trying to get information.
Yeah, and it's hard to really split here where it's journalism and where it's someone that's actually trying to just generate content for his channel and is out there trying to create a mob. Now, we know, and this came out a little bit in Hank's affidavit today, but Nick knows this personally, that Turtleboy has claimed, and there may be other evidence of this on the phones, that Karen Reed was giving him information to help harass these witnesses, including giving the addresses of the witnesses and the investigators. And he organized what they called a rolling rally, where they took over 100 people in dozens of cars to all the homes of the witnesses and several of the investigators, They had a bullhorn, and they were out there. These were in quiet residential areas, blocking traffic. People were sheltering in the houses. They had to bring kids into the bathrooms to hide so they wouldn't hear it. A couple of nurses, part of the thing, were getting out of their cars and spitting in every driveway. This is not just journalism. This is a mob. By any definition, he's whipped up a hysteria, is making a lot of money off it, and the defendant has exploited that and been a part of that from day one. And this is mentioned in Hank's document. He's in Hank Brennan's recent document from the prosecutor saying...
Before we run out of time, I want Nick to just respond on the nature of the... Were you there, Nick, for this rolling rally?
No, I wasn't there for that, no. So I really can't speak on who spit where or what, but no, I wasn't there.
So, where are we in all of this, Wayne? Where is the line between the First Amendment, right, to speak your mind, not agree with someone, and where you cross the line?
You can't put people in fear of physical harm, and that's going to be the principal line. And frankly, rolling rallies, loud noises, all of that stuff, unless it comes to a point where there's fear of physical harm, there is a strong First Amendment presumption in favor of being able to speak your mind.
All right, we're out of time for tonight, but I wanted to make sure I wrap this all up. Sorry, Joseph. He wanted to say something.
I had a lot to add to that.
All right, give me 3 seconds.
Just the statute of Massachusetts covers not just fear of physical harm, fear of economic harm, duress, harassment, are all things. Just like you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, you can't intentionally harass witnesses if your goal is to make them not want to testify.
When we come back, something else you need to know.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, coming up next, only on Court TV.
An Iowa man is found unconscious after crashing his car. He asked police to check on his girlfriend, recalling flashes of violence. Now he's on trial for her brutal murder.
The Visions of Violence murder trial, weekday mornings on Court TV.
Time to reveal something else you need to know tonight. Let's take a look at the big board. Died of natural causes. Legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy. This is sad. The way it happened, let's take a listen to the sheriff.
Mr. Hackman's initial pacemaker data revealed cardiac activity on February 17th, with subsequent pacemaker interrogation demonstrating an abnormal rhythm of atrial fibrillation on February 18th, which was the last record of heart activity. Based on this information, it is reasonable to conclude that Mr. Hackman probably died around February 18th. Based on the circumstances, it is reasonable to conclude that Ms. Hackman passed away first, with February 11th being the last time that she was known to be alive.
So it looks like Betsy died first on the 11th, and a week later, Gene Hackman passed away, there were severe signs of Alzheimer's, and it's so sad thinking about that last week of his life. But there's your answer, folks. Please take a look at your television screen. We need your help. There is a missing child. Alec Yell is her name, just 15 years old, missing out of Des Moines, Iowa, since February 23rd. If you see Alec, take a look at the picture. If you see her, please pick up the phone, make a call, make a difference. 911, 1-800-THE-LOST, or you can call the Missing Person Information Clearinghouse, Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. That number is on your screen right now. Let's see if we can get Alec to a safe place tonight. Don't go anywhere. Vinnie Politan Investigates is next. In the meantime, please don't forget to hug the kids.